Welcome to Starbound Fantasy channel. My name is Aurum, and I'll be your narrator today. Please check to see if you've subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and just allows our stories to pop up on your feed more often. Amber light scattered through the cut glass windows of Mistwood Manor as Lord Thaddeus Ravencroft adjusted his formal jacket. The garment hung a touch too loose around his shoulders, a hand-me-down from an uncle, tailored in haste for the occasion. Not that any amount of fine stitching would have mattered. The elven nobles glided past him in their flowing attire that seemed to capture and redirect light itself, garments that had been perfected over centuries. He caught fragments of whispered conversations as he crossed the threshold into the grand ballroom.
The eccentric Ravencroft heir spends his inheritance on bizarre magical experiments instead of proper breeding. Amber eyes like an animal.
The last comment made his jaw tighten. Thaddeus had learned long ago that his unusual eye color, rare among humans, unsettled many. Too close to elven amber, too far from human brown. But tonight that was the least of his concerns. The season's grand solstice ball was the centerpiece of Elven High Society's calendar, and his invitation had come as a surprise. Officially, minor human nobles were included as a diplomatic courtesy. Unofficially, they provided amusement, pet-like curiosities who fumbled through elven customs with their blunt fingers and imperfect pronunciation.
Lord Ravencroft.
A crystal flute of sparkling wine appeared before him, held by an elven servant who bowed with perfect grace.
The summer vintage. Lord Mistwood's welcome to first-time guests.
Thaddeus accepted the glass.
Thank you, though I suspect Lord Mistwood has other motivations than welcoming me.
The servant's eyes widened slightly before his professional mask slipped back into place.
I wouldn't presume to know my lord's mind.
No? Pity. The servants always know more than their masters think. A smile ghosted across the servant's face before disappearing.
Perhaps in human households.
In all households, Thaddeus countered.
The difference is merely in how well we hide our knowledge.
The servant gave an almost imperceptible nod before melting back into the crowd. Thaddeus sipped the wine, sweeter than he preferred, but with complex notes that bloomed on his tongue. Even elven wine seemed designed to remind humans of their inferiority, 100-year fermentations that created flavors impossible to achieve in a human lifetime. A hush fell over the gathering as a solitary figure stepped onto the center dais. Lady Elindra Moonshadow took her place before an ornate harp crafted from pale wood and strands of what looked like actual moonlight. She wore a gown of midnight blue that contrasted with her silver-white hair, which fell in a complicated arrangement of braids to her waist. Her fingers hovered over the strings for a moment, and then descended. The first notes seemed to bend the air, creating ripples in the room's magical atmosphere. Thaddeus narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just music. It was magical manipulation disguised as entertainment. As the melody unfolded, he observed how the lady's fingers didn't merely pluck the strings, but seemed to draw essence from them. The musical phrase would begin with conventional sound, then transmute into pure magical current that altered the ambient energy of the room. A technique he'd read about but never witnessed. Emotional essence drawing. When her gaze swept across the audience, her eyes, a striking silver blue, locked briefly with his. The melody intensified for a half measure, producing a harmonic that raised goosebumps along Thaddeus's arms. Several older elven nobles exchanged glances. The performance concluded with a cascading pattern that left the room's ambience noticeably altered, warmer, more receptive. The audience erupted in cultured applause, and Lady Elindra bowed with the perfect degree of grace, enough to show appreciation, not enough to suggest subservience. An exquisite manipulation of the harmonic essence fields, came a voice to Thaddeus's right, though I suppose that's lost on human ears. Lord Evander Mistwood stood beside him, resplendent in robes of green and gold, his 9 centuries of life evident only in the depth of his eyes and the subtle network of lines around them. Not entirely lost, Thaddeus replied, though I admit I feel the effects more than I understand the method. Mistwood's eyebrows rose a fraction. How unexpected. Most humans don't even feel the effects. He studied Thaddeus more carefully. Your eyes. Quite unusual for your kind. A family trait, from my mother's side. Indeed. I don't recall any human bloodlines with amber coloration. Thaddeus smiled thinly. How many human bloodlines do you recall at all, my lord? Instead of taking offense, Mistwood laughed, a sound like water over polished stones. Touché, young Ravencroft. Perhaps the evening won't be as tedious as I feared. Before Thaddeus could respond, a ripple of deference moved through the crowd. The attendees parted to reveal a tall figure whose presence seemed to compress the space around him. Archmagister Pheloran Nightshade had arrived, fashionably late as befitted his station. His robes were deceptively simple, their black fabric seeming to reflect no light at all. The only adornments were runes embroidered in thread that gleamed with the same silver-blue hue as Lady Elendra's eyes. 7 centuries of magical breeding, Mistwood murmured. They say his family has been selectively enhancing their essence since before humans learned to build in stone. Thaddeus watched as Pheloran moved through the crowd, accepting obeisances with the barest nods. When he reached Lady Elendra, he took her hand and raised it to his lips in a gesture that somehow managed to appear both courtly and possessive. My future bride, he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, whose musical gifts will soon enhance the Nightshade lineage. The gathering applauded appropriately. Only Thaddeus noticed how Lady Elendra's fingers curled inward slightly at the proclamation, how her smile remained fixed on her face without reaching her eyes. The orchestra resumed playing, and the formal dances began. Thaddeus kept to the periphery, observing more than participating. He watched the elaborate patterns of the dancers, noting how the choreography subtly channeled magical currents through the room. Even their recreation served a magical purpose.
You're not joining the dance, Lord Ravencroft?
A young elven noblewoman addressed him, her tone suggesting she found his wallflower status amusing. I fear my human clumsiness would disrupt the magical harmonies, he replied.
Nonsense. The circle dance requires no special abilities. Even the servants participate.
She gestured to where couples were forming a large ring.
Come, I'll partner with you for the first turn, though I warn you I'll abandon you when the essence weaving begins.
Before he could politely decline, she had taken his arm and pulled him into the circle. The dance began simply enough, steps and turns that even a human could follow without embarrassment. Thaddeus kept his attention on his feet and the rhythm, knowing that a misstep would confirm every elven prejudice about human awkwardness. The music shifted key, and partners changed. Thaddeus found himself face to face with Lady Elendra Moonshadow. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Not the flawless perfection of most elven nobility, but something more interesting. A slight asymmetry to her features, a tiny scar near her left eyebrow, a stubborn set to her mouth.
Lord Ravencroft,
she said, taking his hands as the dance required.
The human with amber eyes.
Lady Moonshadow, he replied. The elf with human expressions. Her eyes widened, then narrowed.
Bold words for a guest.
I meant no offense. Merely an observation that your face reveals more than is customary among your kind.
And yours reveals less than is customary among yours.
Her fingers tightened on his as they turned.
You watch too carefully for a human noble supposedly here to drink wine and be decorative.
The dance brought them closer, then apart, their hands maintaining contact as they circled each other. Thaddeus felt a subtle probing, not physical, but magical, as if she were testing his essence. Perhaps I find elven customs fascinating, he suggested.
Perhaps you find elven weaknesses fascinating,
she countered. The music crescendoed, and all dancers joined hands to form the circle again. This was the moment the previous noblewoman had warned about, the essence weaving. Elven magic would flow through the joined hands, creating patterns that would rise above the dancers in luminous threads. Thaddeus braced himself for embarrassment. His small magical abilities were a secret he guarded carefully, not enough to participate in an elven ritual, certainly. He would be the dead link in the chain, the dark spot in their glowing circle. Lady Elindra's hands clasped his firmly as the magic began to flow. He felt it like a current seeking ground pressing against the barriers of his skin. Against his better judgment, he let his own meager essence respond. What should have been a trickle became a torrent. Their magical essences didn't merely connect, they harmonized, amplifying each other. The luminous thread that rose from their joined hands wasn't the expected silver blue of the moonshadow line, nor was it the muddy brown most humans produced. It was a brilliant amber gold that pulsed with unexpected strength. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the ballroom. The magical current grew stronger, pulling essence from both of them in a display that outshone the other connections in the circle. Lady Elindra's eyes met his, wide with shock and something else, recognition. The music ended abruptly. The glowing threads dissipated, except for the amber gold connection between them, which lingered a moment longer before fading. Around them, the ballroom had gone quiet. Thaddeus bowed low, breaking contact. "Forgive me, Lady Moonshadow. It seems my human clumsiness has disrupted your ritual after all." She didn't immediately reply, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Finally, she curtsied.
"No disruption, Lord Ravencroft. Merely unexpected harmony."
As she turned away, Thaddeus became aware of Archmagister Phelorin watching from the edge of the dance floor. His face betrayed no emotion, but the temperature around him seemed to drop several degrees. Thaddeus retreated to the edge of the gathering, cursing his foolishness. He had revealed too much, drawn attention he could ill afford. Perhaps it would be best to make his excuses and leave. Before he could act on this decision, a chime sounded, signaling the beginning of the midnight feast. The guests migrated toward the grand dining hall, where tables groaned under the weight of exotic delicacies. Thaddeus found himself seated at a lower table, far from the high nobility, a pointed reminder of his status. From his position, however, he had a clear view of the high table, where Lady Elindra sat beside her brother, Lord Silvendrall Moonshadow. Their heads were bent together in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Though their voices didn't carry, their body language suggested disagreement, her hands gesturing emphatically, his face set in stern disapproval. When she suddenly stood and strode from the table, her brother made no move to follow. Neither did Phelorin, who observed her departure with cold calculation. Only Thaddeus noticed the direction she took, not toward the main halls, but through a side door that likely led to the gardens. He waited a few minutes, then rose casually from his seat. As he passed a serving table, he picked up 2 glasses of the luminescent elven wine, giving him a plausible excuse for wandering. The gardens of Mistwood Manor were famous throughout the kingdom. Ancient magical cultivars that responded to emotional and magical essences, blooming or withdrawing based on the nature of those who walked among them. The paths wound through living sculptures of vegetation that shifted subtly as one passed, never appearing exactly the same to any two viewers. Thaddeus followed the sound of soft muttering until he found Lady Alindra in a secluded grove, kneeling beside a pool of water that reflected the dual moons overhead. She had removed her elaborate outer robe, and her fingers traced patterns on the water's surface, leaving trails of silver-blue light that formed complex runes. He recognized the pattern immediately, a temporary severance ritual, designed to block the binding magic of formal contracts. But this was an advanced working, far beyond the simple nullifications he'd read about.
"You're missing several key elements," he said quietly.
She whirled, one hand raised defensively. A crackle of power gathered at her fingertips.
"The Lunara configuration requires a third anchor point,"
he continued, stepping forward slowly.
"And you're attempting to sever a binding contract, not merely mask it. The water works as a reflective medium, but you need something that can absorb the backlash when the binding resists."
The magical charge gathered at her fingertips didn't dissipate, but her expression changed from alarm to suspicion.
How does a minor human noble recognize an ancient elven unbinding ritual?
"The same way I recognized what you were doing with the harp earlier."
He offered one of the wine glasses.
"Extensive reading and observation."
She didn't take the glass.
No human library contains such texts.
"No human library that you know of."
He set both glasses on a nearby stone bench.
"May I?"
Without waiting for permission, he knelt at the opposite side of the pool and traced his own pattern on the water's surface. His magic left fainter trails, but the runes he formed interlocked with hers, creating a more stable configuration.
That's a Solarian variant,
she said, watching his fingers move.
But it's wrong. The third vertex should align with the lunar position, not...
She broke off as his pattern completed, revealing a completely different approach to the unbinding.
That's not in any text I've studied.
Because it's not elven magic.
He met her gaze across the pool.
It's human adaptation of elven principles. Less elegant, perhaps, but more flexible.
She stared at him, then at the completed pattern floating on the water's surface.
You're trying to sever my betrothal binding to Valoran.
I'm showing you how it could be done.
He sat back on his heels.
Whether you complete the ritual is your choice, but you should know that temporary severance will only delay the inevitable. The binding will reassert itself within days, possibly hours.
I'm aware.
She stood, brushing off her gown.
I merely wished for some respite to think clearly without his essence influencing mine.
Thaddeus nodded.
A reasonable desire. The Nightshade lineage is known for its persuasive magical influence.
How do you know this?
She circled the pool, approaching him directly.
You're not what you appear to be, Lord Ravencroft.
Few people are,
he replied, rising to meet her.
But in my case, I'm exactly what I appear to be. A human with an unusually strong interest in magical theory.
And unusually strong magical ability for your kind.
Her eyes narrowed.
Your essence responded to mine during the dance. That shouldn't be possible.
According to whom?
He retrieved the wine glasses, offering one to her again. This time, she took it.
According to the Elven magical academics who have spent millennia insisting that humans are magically inferior? Or according to your own experience tonight?
She sipped the wine, studying him over the rim of her glass.
You're suggesting that the established understanding of human magical capability is wrong.
I'm suggesting it's incomplete.
He tasted his own wine.
Blood and lineage are factors in magical potential, certainly, but they're not the only factors. Will, emotion, belief,
These elements shape essence as much as heritage does. Heresy, she said, but without heat. Next you'll claim that servant-born elves could match high nobility in power. Under the right circumstances, yes. He gestured toward the incomplete ritual still glowing on the water's surface. Would you like me to demonstrate a different approach to your problem? After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Thaddeus set down his glass and extended his hand, palm up. A small flame kindled there, not the silver blue of elven fire, but a warm amber gold that matched his eyes. Impossible, she whispered. Human essence can't sustain elemental manifestation without external focus objects. So the textbooks claim. The flame danced over his palm, casting amber light on their faces. Yet here we are. She stared at the flame, then at him. Show me how. They met in the gardens for the next 3 nights. Under the twin moons, Lady Elindra shared ancient elven magical techniques passed down through the moon shadow line, subtle manipulations of essence that required finesse rather than raw power. In return, Thaddeus demonstrated how humans had developed workarounds for their supposed magical limitations, techniques born of necessity and innovation rather than inherited privilege. It's about emotions, he explained on the 3rd night as they sat cross-legged beneath a tree whose leaves shifted color with their conversation. Elven magic draws on the steady flow of essence that comes from your extended lifespans. Human magic burns hotter, fueled by the intensity of our shorter lives. That contradicts everything I've been taught. Elindra traced a pattern in the air, leaving a trail of silver blue light. We're told that human essence is too chaotic, too undisciplined for complex magic. A convenient explanation for keeping humans in their place. Thaddeus traced the same pattern, his amber light intertwining with hers. But think about it. What drives the most powerful elven magics? Emotional connections, bloodline loyalties, ritual intensity. These aren't logical constructs. They're emotional ones. She frowned. You're saying emotion enhances magic rather than destabilizing it? I'm saying emotion is magic at its core. Your people have simply developed better methods of channeling and controlling it over your longer lives. He held out his hand. May I? After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. Their essences mingled immediately, creating that same amber gold and silver blue harmony they'd accidentally revealed during the dance. Feel that? He asked softly. That's not just compatible magical signatures. That's emotional resonance created by blending essence that's stronger than either of ours alone. Her fingers tightened on his. This would be considered essence corruption by the high houses. Only because they fear what it represents. He didn't let go. Think of the implications, Elindra. If magical ability isn't solely determined by bloodline, then the entire social structure of elven society is built on a lie. She completed his thought, her eyes widening. The servant-born elves, the mixed heritage families pushed to the fringes. All potentially as magically capable as the high houses under the right circumstances. He released her hand reluctantly. That's why they maintain such strict control over magical education and practice. Knowledge is the key, not blood. She was quiet for a long moment. Is that why you came to the Solstice Ball? To prove this theory? I came to observe. He smiled slightly. Meeting you was an unexpected variable in my research. Am I merely a research subject to you then? There was an edge to her voice. No, he said firmly. You're a brilliant, trapped woman who deserves better than to be a magical breeding mare for Nightshade's dynastic ambitions. Her breath caught. You speak dangerously, Thaddeus. I speak honestly. Something rarely heard in these gardens, I'd wager.
Their conversation continued long into the night, moving from magical theory to personal histories. She spoke of growing up under the weight of the Moonshadow legacy, of her brother Sylvendral's political ambitions, of the betrothal arranged when she was barely 50 years old, a child by Elven standards. He told her of losing his parents young, of being raised by an aunt who encouraged his unconventional studies, of the dwindling Ravencroft fortunes that had pushed him to seek knowledge rather than wealth or status. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they found themselves seated closer together beneath the color-changing tree. Their voices dropped to whispers despite the privacy of the garden.
If your theory is correct,
Elindra said,
what would it mean for the future? For elves and humans alike?
A revolution of essence, Thaddeus replied. A world where magical ability is nurtured rather than predetermined, where both our species could evolve beyond current limitations.
A beautiful dream,
she sighed.
And an impossible one. The high houses would never relinquish their power willingly.
Change rarely comes by permission of those in power. His hand found hers again. But it always comes, eventually.
Not in my lifetime,
she smiled sadly.
And my lifetime stretches far longer than yours, human.
Unless we change that too. He leaned closer. The artificial extension of elven lives through essence manipulation is another construct of your magical system, not an immutable fact of nature. Her eyes widened.
Now you truly speak heresy.
I speak possibility. His voice dropped even lower. The same possibility I see when our essences merge. Neither could say afterward who moved first. Their lips met as the first rays of dawn filtered through the leaves above, casting dappled light across their faces. The kiss deepened, their magical essences swirling around them in spirals of amber gold and silver blue. A gasp broke them apart. Elendra's handmaiden stood at the garden path entrance, her hand pressed to her mouth, eyes wide in shock. Before either could speak, she turned and fled back toward the manor.
She'll go straight to my brother,
Elindra said, getting to her feet.
Or worse, to Phaeloryn.
Thaddeus stood as well, his mind racing. How long do we have?
Until morning assembly at the latest, perhaps only hours.
She pressed her fingers to her lips, which still tingled with the residual magic of their kiss.
You should leave the manor immediately. Take the south road before they can...
I'm not running. He caught her hands. Not without you.
Don't be foolish. There's nowhere in the kingdom I could hide from Phaeloryn's tracking magic.
Then we don't hide. We fight. His amber eyes were fierce in the dawn light. But first, may I have something of yours? Something imbued with your essence. She frowned in confusion.
What do you need exactly?
Something personal, he explained. A physical anchor for a magical working I'm planning. The more connected to your emotions, the better. A tear slipped down her cheek, a combination of fear and frustration at their impossible situation. Thaddeus noticed immediately and reached into his pocket, producing a tiny crystal vial. May I? He asked softly, gesturing toward her face. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes as he carefully caught the tear before it could fall. A tear freely given contains pure emotional essence, he explained, sealing the vial and tucking it away. More potent than any trinket.
My essence as your weapon,
she whispered. He met her gaze steadily. Not just a weapon. Ammunition against centuries of lies. They parted reluctantly, agreeing to meet again if circumstances allowed. Thaddeus returned to his guest quarters in the eastern wing of the manor, his mind buzzing with plans and possibilities. If his theory was correct, if the connection between him and Elindra was as magically significant as he believed, then perhaps there was a way to challenge the established order directly. His contemplation was interrupted by a sharp knock at his door. A pair of elven guards stood in the hallway, their expressions impassive.
Lord Ravencroft, your presence is required in the Grand Hall immediately.
He straightened his jacket and nodded. Of course, lead the way. The great hall was already filled with elven nobility when he arrived. They parted silently as the guards escorted him to the center of the room, where Lord Evandir Mistwood sat on an ornately carved chair. Beside him stood Phelorin Nightshade, his cold eyes fixed on Thaddeus with undisguised contempt. Lord Thaddeus Ravencroft, Mistwood announced, his voice carrying through the hall. You stand accused of essence corruption and attempted pollution of a noble bloodline. How do you answer these charges? Before Thaddeus could reply, Elendra stepped forward from the crowd.
The accusations are false, my lord. Lord Ravencroft and I were merely discussing theoretical approaches to essence manipulation.
Silence! Phelorin's voice cracked like a whip.
Your magic has been contaminated by human essence. The evidence is clear to anyone with eyes to see.
Indeed, Thaddeus could see it himself, the faint amber glow that now mingled with the silver blue of her natural aura, just as his own aura now carried traces of her essence.
The lady came to no harm, Thaddeus said calmly. Quite the contrary. Our exchange of magical knowledge was mutually beneficial.
Exchange? Phelorin laughed, a sound like breaking glass.
What could a human possibly know of magic that would benefit an elf of the Moonshadow line?
A great deal, apparently, came a new voice. Lord Sylvendral Moonshadow stepped forward, his ageless face set in severe lines. Since my sister risked her reputation and her betrothal to learn it. He turned to Elendra, who met his gaze defiantly.
Brother, you know this betrothal was never my choice. I was a child when you arranged it.
You were 50, he replied dismissively. Old enough to understand your duty to our house.
My duty? Or your ambition?
She gestured to Phelorin.
This match has nothing to do with my happiness or even our family's standing. It's about his need for our bloodline's particular magical traits.
A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Phelorin's eyes narrowed dangerously.
Enough of this, he snapped. The human has corrupted her mind as well as her essence.
He turned to Lord Mistwood.
As is my right under our laws, I demand satisfaction for this transgression. A soul duel to be conducted at tomorrow's dueling tournament.
Gasps and whispers filled the hall. A soul duel was the most serious form of magical combat, a contest not merely of skill but of essence itself, where the loser could suffer permanent magical damage or even complete essence extraction. Granted, Mistwood said, looking troubled. According to ancient law, challenges of essence cannot be denied. He turned to Thaddeus. Lord Ravencroft, do you understand what you face? I do, Thaddeus replied, keeping his voice steady despite the cold fear in his gut. And I accept. Very well, Mistwood stood. Lord Ravencroft will be confined to the eastern wing until the duel. Lady Elendra will be placed in protective stasis to prevent further essence contamination.
No!
Elendra's protest was cut short as two guards took her arms. She struggled briefly before a shimmer of magic enveloped her, freezing her in place mid-motion. Her eyes remained aware and furious as they carried her rigid form from the hall. Thaddeus was escorted back to his chambers, where the door was locked behind him. The wards placed on the room would prevent any magical working beyond the most basic personal magics. Not that he had the resources for complex spell work in any case. His situation seemed hopeless. Phelorin Nightshade was one of the most powerful mages in the kingdom, with centuries of magical practice and the accumulated essence of generations flowing through his veins. In a conventional duel, Thaddeus wouldn't stand a chance. But conventional thinking was what had kept humans magically subjugated for centuries. If his theories were correct, there might be another approach, one that no pure-blooded elven mage would anticipate or understand. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find a human servant girl with downcast eyes.
"A delivery, my lord,"
she said, offering a small bundle.
"From a friend."
Inside the bundle, he found his research journals, the ones he'd left in his carriage, supposedly secure in their warded case. A note in an unfamiliar hand accompanied them. Knowledge is power. Use it well. The servant disappeared before he could question her further. Thaddeus spread the journals on his bed, searching frantically for any insight that might help him survive the coming duel. As the afternoon waned, another knock came at his door. This time, the visitor shocked him. Lord Sylvendral Moonshadow stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 guards who looked pointedly away as he entered the room.
"Lord Ravencroft," Sylvendral said, his voice low. "I believe we need to speak plainly."
"About your sister?" Thaddeus crossed his arms. "Or about the fact that you've sentenced her to magical stasis against her will?"
"About reality."
Sylvendral paced the small chamber.
"My sister is kept in stasis for her own protection. Without it, Phelorin could claim his betrothal rights early, binding their essences permanently before the duel."
Thaddeus's stomach turned.
"Is that legal?"
"Legal enough, with the right interpretations and the right judges."
Sylvendral's mouth twisted.
"The law was written by the high houses, after all."
"Then why are you here? To gloat about my impending defeat?"
"To understand."
Sylvendral fixed him with an intense stare.
"What did you show my sister that made her willing to risk everything? What magic could be worth betraying centuries of tradition and alliance?"
Thaddeus considered his words carefully. "I showed her that magic isn't solely determined by bloodline, that will and emotion play equal roles in shaping essence, that the artificial hierarchies your society has built around magical ability are just that, artificial." To his surprise, Sylvendral nodded slowly.
"I suspected as much. Your theories align with certain restricted texts in our archives."
"Restricted why? Because they threaten the power structure?"
"Because they could lead to chaos."
Sylvendral's voice hardened.
"Do you understand what's at stake here? This isn't merely about you or Elindra, or even about Phelorin's pride. This betrothal represents an alliance between houses that has maintained peace for generations."
"Peace for whom?" Thaddeus challenged. "For the High Elves, certainly, but what about the Servant-born Elves? The mixed heritage communities on the borders? The humans who serve your houses with inferior magic?" Sylvendral's face remained impassive.
"Better an imperfect peace than the devastation of open magical warfare, which is precisely what your revolution of essence would trigger."
"Only because those in power refuse to share it." Thaddeus leaned forward. "Tell me the truth, Lord Moonshadow. Why does Phelorin really want your sister?"
A long silence stretched between them before Sylvendral answered. "The elven bloodlines are failing," he said finally. "Our lifespans shorten with each generation. Our magical potency diminishes. The high houses have managed to conceal this decline, but the trend is unmistakable." He sighed deeply. "Elindra possesses a rare variant of our ancestral magic, one that Phelorin believes could help reverse this decline when combined with the Nightshade essence."
"She's not a broodmare or a magical reservoir," Thaddeus growled. "She's a person with her own will and dreams."
"She is a Moonshadow," Sylvendral corrected, "born to duty as was I. He moved toward the door. I didn't come to debate ethics with you, Lord Ravencroft. I came to make the stakes clear. Tomorrow's duel isn't just about your life or even Elindra's happiness. It's about the future of our entire society.
A society built on lies,
Thaddeus said quietly. Sylvandrall paused at the threshold.
Perhaps, but lies have preserved us for thousands of years.
His eyes, so like his sister's, held a warning.
Fëlorinn will not show mercy tomorrow. He cannot afford to, now that you've revealed your unusual abilities. Too many have witnessed it.
And if I win? Thaddeus asked. A ghost of a smile touched Sylvandral's lips.
In 7 centuries, no one has defeated Fëlorinn Nightshade in magical combat. But if by some miracle you manage it,
he shook his head.
It wouldn't matter. The high houses would never accept the implications.
After Sylvandral departed, Thaddeus returned to his journals with renewed urgency.
If the elven bloodlines were truly failing, that added a new dimension to his theory.
Deep in his oldest journal, he found what he was looking for. An account of a half-elven mage who had once channeled an entire village's emotional essence during an ancient border war. The mage had created a temporary network of shared power, using the villagers' fear and determination to fuel defensive spells far beyond his individual capacity. The technique had been dismissed by elven scholars as a lucky aberration, perhaps even a fabrication. But Thaddeus had collected similar accounts from across the kingdom, instances where supposedly limited magical users had performed extraordinary feats under emotional stress, often in groups. If he could adapt this principle to the formal structure of a soul duel, it would be dangerous, possibly fatal.
But it might be his only chance.
Through the night, he worked feverishly, combining theoretical frameworks from his research with the practical techniques Elindra had shown him. By dawn, he had formulated a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. Perhaps both. When the guards came to escort him to the dueling grounds, he was ready. Not confident, but resolved. He carried nothing but the clothes on his back and the tiny crystal vial containing Elindra's tear. The dueling grounds occupied the central courtyard of Mistwood Manor, a circular space surrounded by tiered seating where the assembled nobility could observe in comfort. As Thaddeus was led to his position, he noted the composition of the crowd. Not just the high house elves, but their retinues of lesser elven nobles and human servants, positioned at the furthest edges of the gathering. He spotted Elindra immediately. She had been awakened from stasis and sat pale and constrained beside her brother. Her eyes found his across the space, and he saw fear there, but also something else, a fierce, desperate hope. Fëlorinn Nightshade entered from the opposite side of the grounds, wearing ceremonial armor that caught the morning light. The metal wasn't steel, but some elven alloy that seemed to flow like liquid silver, embedded with runes that pulsed with ancestral magic. He carried no weapons. In a soul duel, essence itself was both weapon and shield. Lord Mistwood stood to address the gathering.
We convene today to witness the resolution of a challenge of essence. Archmagister Fëlorinn Nightshade has called for soul combat against Lord Thaddeus Ravencroft on the grounds of essence corruption and attempted bloodline pollution. He turned to Fëlorinn. Does the challenger wish to make a formal declaration?
Fëlorinn stepped forward, his voice ringing clear across the courtyard.
I stand in defense of ancient tradition, pure lineage, and the sacred boundaries between elven and human essence. This human has violated those boundaries, attempting to corrupt a noble daughter of the Moonshadow line. For this transgression, I claim the right of essence extraction.
A murmur ran through the crowd. Essence extraction was the most severe punishment possible. It would leave Thaddeus an empty shell, capable of basic function but stripped of all magical potential and most of his personality. Mistwood turned to Thaddeus. "Does the challenged wish to make a formal declaration?" Thaddeus took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I stand for truth over tradition, reality over ritual, and the freedom of essence to flow according to will rather than bloodline. I reject the false limitations placed on human magic and challenge the very foundations of Elven magical supremacy." He paused, meeting Phelorin's cold gaze directly. "For the crime of imprisoning generations in artificial magical hierarchies, I claim the right of awakening." This time, the crowd's reaction was more than a murmur. It was a wave of shocked exclamations and nervous laughter. Awakening wasn't a recognized claim in formal dueling, but then humans weren't supposed to be capable of soul combat at all. Mistwood recovered his composure quickly. "The declarations are noted. The duel will commence on my mark and continue until one combat is rendered incapable of continuation." He raised his hand. "Begin!" Phelorin wasted no time. The air around him shimmered as he drew on centuries of accumulated family magic. It swirled around him like liquid starlight, forming weapons, shields, and complex binding spells in rapid succession. The magic took shape as spectral constructs, swords and spears of pure energy that hovered at the ready. Thaddeus stood motionless, making no attempt to defend himself or prepare a counterattack. The crowd watched in puzzled silence, perhaps expecting some clever human trick. But as Phelorin's arsenal of magical constructs grew more impressive, whispers of disappointment began to circulate. Was the human simply going to accept defeat? Phelorin apparently thought so. "Is this your strategy, Ravencroft?" he called. "To die with dignity rather than suffer the humiliation of essence extraction? A coward's choice, but I'll grant it if you yield now." "I have no intention of yielding," Thaddeus replied calmly. "I'm merely waiting." "For what? Divine intervention?" Phelorin laughed. "Even your gods fear our magic." "Not for intervention," Thaddeus said. "For witnesses." He raised his hand, holding Elindra's tear in its crystal vial. The morning light caught it, refracting through the tear and sending prismatic light dancing across the courtyard. "What nonsense is this?" Phelorin demanded. "No trinket will save you." Thaddeus didn't respond. He closed his eyes, focusing his will through the tear as he had practiced through the night. For 5 breathless seconds, nothing happened. Then, the tear began to glow with an inner light. Not the amber gold of Thaddeus's essence, not the silver blue of Elindra's, but a perfect blending of the two. The light expanded, reaching out in tendrils that sought specific targets in the watching crowd. First, it connected to every human servant present, then to the lesser elven nobles, and finally to certain members of the high houses whose expressions showed surprise rather than outrage. "Stop this immediately!" Phelorin shouted, but his voice lacked certainty. This was magic he didn't recognize, couldn't classify within his understanding of essence manipulation. The networked light pulsed once, twice, and then the flow reversed. Instead of emanating from Thaddeus, essence began flowing toward him from every connected individual. Not taken by force as in the dark rituals of essence theft, but freely given, shared through resonance of emotion and will. Thaddeus's form became haloed in a light that grew steadily brighter, a confluence of hundreds of individual magical signatures merging into something entirely new. His amber eyes blazed like twin suns as he raised both hands toward Phelorin. The Archmagister attacked without further hesitation, sending his arsenal of magical constructs hurtling toward Thaddeus in a devastating wave. But as they struck the barrier of shared essence surrounding him, They shattered into motes of light that were simply absorbed into the greater whole. "Impossible," Phelorin whispered, his composure cracking for the first time. He redoubled his efforts, drawing deeper on his ancestral magic to form more complex attacks, binding spells meant to sever Thaddeus's connections to the network, banishment invocations targeting the human directly. For a moment, it seemed to work. The shared essence wavered, and Thaddeus grimaced with the effort of maintaining the connections. Phelorin pressed his advantage, his hands weaving complex patterns that pulled more power from the runes embedded in his armor. But just as his attack reached its peak, Elendra Moonshadow stood. Despite her brother's restraining hand, she raised her voice in a clear, bell-like tone that cut through the magical chaos.
"By choice and will, I add my essence to this working."
Her declaration sent a visible pulse of silver-blue power into the network, strengthening it dramatically. Thaddeus's barrier stabilized, then expanded. Sylvendral tried to pull his sister back into her seat. "Have you lost your mind? This is treason against our entire way of life."
"No,"
she replied, loud enough for all to hear.
"It's the truth we've been denying. Magic responds to will and emotion as much as bloodline. We've known it for centuries, but buried the knowledge to maintain our privilege."
Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Several other elves, mainly younger ones from lesser houses, stood as well, adding their essence to the network in defiance of tradition. The manor's magical barriers began to fluctuate wildly as the shared power grew beyond their designed parameters. Throughout the courtyard and beyond, strange phenomena manifested. Flowers blooming out of season, stones floating momentarily, pools of water forming intricate patterns. Most shocking of all, human servants began casting spells spontaneously. Simple magics at first, light globes, minor levitations, elemental manifestations, but magic that should have been impossible for their bloodlines nonetheless. "Arrest them!" Phelorin shouted, his voice cracking with strain as he tried to maintain his attack against Thaddeus's now overwhelming power. "This is insurrection!" But the guards hesitated, watching as their fellow servants performed feats of magic they had been told were beyond their capability. Some even joined in, their own latent abilities awakening through the network of shared essence. Lord Mistwood rose from his seat, his ancient face troubled. "Cease this demonstration immediately, Lord Ravencroft. You've made your point, but you risk tearing apart the very fabric of our society." "That's precisely my intention," Thaddeus replied, his voice strangely doubled as if the entire network spoke through him. "Your society is built on a foundation of lies. Those lies end today." With a gesture that combined elven elegance and human determination, he gathered the shared essence into a focused beam that struck Phelorin square in the chest. The Archmagister's magical defenses, the product of 7 centuries of refined elven magic, held for precisely 5 heartbeats before shattering completely. Phelorin Nightshade, undefeated duelist of the high houses, collapsed to his knees. His elaborate armor cracked and fell away in pieces, revealing a man who suddenly looked very old and very afraid. "Yield!" Thaddeus commanded. Phelorin's eyes blazed with hatred. "Never. I would rather die than submit to human magic." "It isn't just human magic," Thaddeus corrected. "It's magic freely shared among all peoples. The future of essence." Before Phelorin could respond, Sylvendral Moonshadow's voice cut through the chaos. "Guards, seize Lord Ravencroft and any who have joined his working. This is a direct assault on our way of life." The manor guards moved to obey, but found themselves blocked by servants and lesser nobles who had awakened their own magical potential. Scuffles broke out across the courtyard as the rigid hierarchy that had defined Elven society for millennia began to fracture in real time. Elendra fought her way through the growing chaos to Thaddeus' side.
"We need to leave," she urged. "The high houses will bring reinforcements. They'll never allow this knowledge to spread."
"Where can we go?" he asked, maintaining the essence network with visible effort. Valoran's reach extends throughout the kingdom. Her eyes lit with sudden inspiration.
The skyship docks. My family maintains a vessel there, if we can reach it before they lock down the manor completely.
Together, they made their way through the panicked crowd, Thaddeus's network of shared essence creating a path before them as connected individuals moved to assist their passage. Behind them, the sounds of magical combat intensified as more servants and lower-ranked elves discovered their potential. The skyship docks occupied the highest tower of Mistwood Manor, where half a dozen elegant vessels floated tethered to mooring posts. Unlike conventional airships, these were powered entirely by elven magic, supposedly requiring the essence of high-born elves to activate and control. "Which one is yours?" Thaddeus asked as they burst onto the open platform. Elendra pointed to a sleek craft with silver-blue detailing along its hull.
The Moonshadow Skimmer, but I've never piloted it alone. It normally requires at least 3 family members to provide enough essence for sustained flight.
"We don't need 3 family members." Thaddeus took her hand. "We just need our combined essence." Together, they leapt aboard the ship. Elendra placed her hands on the control crystals, large uncut stones embedded in the command console. Thaddeus covered her hands with his, and their blended essence flowed into the ancient mechanisms. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the crystals pulsed with amber gold and silver blue light, and the mooring ropes unlashed themselves. The ship trembled, then rose smoothly into the air. As they ascended above Mistwood Manor, they could see the full extent of what they had sparked. Throughout the estate and the surrounding countryside, brilliant lights flared in irregular patterns, manifestations of magical awakening as humans and lower-ranked elves discovered their untapped potential.
"That's beautiful,"
Elendra whispered.
"Terrifying, but beautiful."
"It's just the beginning," Thaddeus replied, guiding the ship higher toward the horizon. "The High Houses will fight back with everything they have. They won't relinquish power easily."
"Where will we go?"
she asked. He smiled, the light of his eyes reflecting the dawn. "Everywhere. The knowledge must spread too far and too fast for them to contain it. Every village, every town, every mixed community on the borders, they all need to know the truth about their potential." As the skyship soared above the awakening countryside, leaving Mistwood Manor and its fracturing social order behind, Thaddeus and Elendra stood at the prow, their hands still joined, their essences still merged. Below them, the revolution of essence had begun, a transformation that would eventually reshape the very foundations of magic and society in ways neither human nor elf could fully predict. But in that moment, watching the sun rise on a new era, they knew only that they had broken the chains of tradition and revealed a truth too powerful to ever be buried again. The revolution of essence had begun.